I am beyond pissed off at the UFC for letting Jon Jones still be the heavyweight champion. I think it's safe to say that 95% of us all want to see the Jon Jones versus Tom Aspinall fight. And I say 95% because the rest of the 5% who don't want to see the fight is Jon Jones fans because they don't want to see their precious king get knocked out. You already know that if the UFC were to announce this fight, everybody and their mamas are going to buy this pay-per-view. This fight will give generational wealth to the UFC. Well, not like Conor McGregor levels, but you know what I mean. But we got some breaking news, if you could even call it that Jon Jones is done with the sport?
Oh man, I'm excited to see you again.
You know, but you are still active. 10 years left, but you are still active.
He said you got 10 years left, but you're still active.
Oh, yeah, I'm done.
He got me good. He's like,
And the best part? I don't even think Dana even knows about this. Well, I've had it with this man. I need to let this rage out of my system, and we gotta start it off with how he became the champion. Alright, let's do this. Back in 2023, the UFC announced that Jon Jones is going to make his return to the UFC to fight against Cyril Gane for the heavyweight title. But who is Jon? Jon Jones was the light heavyweight champion for the UFC from 2011 to 2020. Nearly 10 years of being a champion. I mean, that's crazy to say out loud. Come on now. I was just a kid, bro. I didn't even know the UFC existed in general. Pretty much, he has been a champion for so long. And it's a perfect record. He has been undefeated in the UFC. He totally didn't win 2 of his fights because he got tested positive for PEDs, and he didn't lose to Dominic Reyes in 2020. It was definitely not a robbery decision, and that's exactly why he's the GOAT. In case you didn't pick that up, that was sarcasm. But anyways, he makes his return and moves up to the heavyweight division and defeats Cyril Gane, who at the time was the #1 heavyweight fighter. This win made people think that he's the GOAT of not just the heavyweight division already, but the entirety of the UFC. And I don't blame them. Like I said, he was the champ in another division for pretty much 10 years, and that's a big accomplishment. And to come back out of not fighting for 3 years and defeating the best heavyweight in just the first round, that would definitely make people put him as the GOAT of the sport. But Jon was looking for another fight with another great heavyweight fighter who was named Stipe Miocic, who was also a heavyweight champion from 2016 to 2020. The fight was then official and they were set to fight each other. However, it didn't go to plan after all, because Jon Jones ends up tearing a pectoral tendon, thus leading to the UFC to cancel the fight. So what did the UFC do as a backup? Well, I'll tell you what they did. They created a new problem, which was having 2 different fighters fighting for the interim title. So we end up putting a brand new fight since Jon wasn't going to be able to fight anymore. And who were those 2 fighters? It was Tom Aspinall versus Sergey Pavlovich. These 2 fighters were crazy and scary heavyweights. All of them had won their fights by a finish, either a knockout or a submission, and mostly ended their fights in just the very first round, the British versus the Russian. In the end, it was Tom Aspinall who won the fight.
Those leg kicks will pay dividends.
And is now the interim champion. So, what comes next? We now enter the ducking era of Jon Jones. Since now that Tom is the interim champion, naturally, he started calling out Jon Jones to fight him instead of fighting Stipe Miocic. I mean, it makes sense. Tom is literally second place in the division now that he has the interim title, is an active heavyweight, is knocking people out in the first round, and you even got people who actually want to see that fight more than Jones versus Stipe. But what was Jon's response? Nah, man, I think I want to fight the GOAT of the heavyweight division, man. Even though he hasn't had a fight since 2021, lost by a knockout, is 42 years old, and not in his prime anymore, yeah, I think that would be good for my legacy, bro. Nah, that's not how that works. Let's define what the interim champion means, alright? Okay, let me tell you. An interim champion in combat sports like UFC or boxing is a temporary title holder, essentially a placeholder for the #1 contender. Once the original champion returns and is able to fight, they must defend their title against the interim champion. Right! My leg! With that said, I think Jon should fight Tom Aspinall instead of Stipe Miocic. But what does Jon do? He just goes on Twitter and just full on denies that he doesn't want to fight Tom Aspinall, not because he's not ducking, and I quote, but that apparently Tom doesn't deserve to fight Jon Jones. What do you mean he doesn't? He's the interim champion. By default, you're supposed to fight him next, but instead you want to fight someone else who hasn't even fought in 3 years because that's good for your legacy? Hell nah. You're absolutely avoiding Tom Aspinall because you know that'll be a harder fight. But it's okay, because the UFC is going to make Jon Jones fight Tom Aspinall regardless, right? Right? For whatever reason, Dana did not want to make Jones versus Aspinall happen. Instead, he insisted that Jones versus Stipe is the fight to make and was just straight up glazing Jon Jones to the max. He even believed that Islam Makhachev is not the pound for pound fighter and that it should be Jon Jones instead.
Jon Jones is the pound for pound best fighter in the world and the greatest fighter fucking ever. Period. End of story. No matter what you think of Jon Jones, he's the fucking best ever, and he's the pound for pound best fighter in the world. And he's the pound for pound best fighter in the world.
Well, except that he
as an educated adult.
The media wanted to see this fight happen and he was not giving it to the people. The fans kept pushing him to make this fight happen. But Dana did end up scheduling Tom Aspinall to fight somebody in July of 2024. And who could that be? It was Jon Jones! Actually, it was Curtis Blades. You mean to tell me that the UFC made Tom Aspinall fight against a different fighter to defend his imaginary belt? You already know Jon was praying for Tom's downfall to happen in that fight. Well, too bad, because Tom knocked Curtis out in the first round. And of course, Tom called out Jon Jones after that fight was over.
Jon Jones is probably watching this, so send him a message.
Hello, Jon. I have nothing against you personally, but I just think I'm better than you. I just know that I can beat you in a fight.
But it didn't matter to Dana because it was officially announced that Jon Jones was fighting Stipe Miocic after all in November 2024. And who do you think won that fight? Well, surprise, surprise, Stipe makes a huge upset and actually knocks out Jon Jones. Just kidding, it was Jon who won the fight. That fight was kind of sad to watch, bro. You had Stipe, who clearly wasn't in his prime anymore, just getting beat up. But at least Stipe retired immediately when the fight is over. But Joe Rogan goes over to Jon to interview him after winning the fight, and he pops the big question on if he'll fight Tom. And let's see what bro said.
There's been all this talk about the future as to whether or not you'll fight a super fight with Alex Pereira, whether or not you'd fight Tom Aspinall, whether you retire after this fight. I know we'd all love to see you keep going. How do you feel right now?
You know what? While I got the moment, while everybody's cheering and so happy, I want to acknowledge Jesus Christ. I decided that maybe I will not retire, and that, and if everything goes right, maybe we'll give you guys what you want to see.
And what would that be? Is that heavyweight, or is that Alex Pereira at heavyweight? What is that? What are you thinking?
You know, I know that we have options. I also want to say a big, big thank you to President Donald Trump for being here tonight. Can I get a oh yeah? Hey, what do you guys think about my version of the Donald Trump? Check it out.
He didn't even answer the question if you think about it. That was back in November of last year. So fast forward today, in May 2025, what's the big update? Well, Jon Jones is done with the sport.
10 years left, but you're still active.
He said you got 10 years left, but you're still active.
I'm done. I'm done.
Wow, bro, shocker. I really didn't see that one coming. Except I did. I saw it miles away before this even happened. What an absolute waste of time for Tom Aspinall, for the UFC, and the fans all around the world who we all thought maybe, just maybe, we just had a little bit of hope that this fight was really gonna happen. You wasted Tom Aspinall's prime years because you were holding the belt hostage. And do you remember that fight he had with Cyril Gane and how I said he was the best heavyweight at the time? Well, I lied. It wasn't Cyril Gane who was the best heavyweight. It was a man named Francis Ngannou. He was the last heavyweight champion, and in fact, Francis was actually down to fight Jon Jones, and even though Jon agreed to have this fight happen, he just never went through with it with the UFC and making it official. And Francis Ngannou was the champion since 2021, but in 2023 he left the UFC due to contract negotiations, and as soon as Francis left, here comes Jon Jones stepping in to fight for the belt almost immediately. Totally wasn't a coincidence right there that he just somehow came back out of retirement after Francis left. You mean to tell me he wasn't ducking Francis Ngannou too? Nah. I think Jon is doing the exact same thing to Tom Aspinall like what he did with Francis. And that is he is avoiding Tom Aspinall because he is scared. The man has an undefeated record. So of course, losing for the very first time will be a huge blow to him. He wants easy fights right now. He even said he wanted to fight Derek Lewis. Why? You're a fool for believing in such tomfoolery. So what should the UFC do? I'd say completely remove him from the championship status. What even is the point of having Jon Jones around if he's not even gonna fight Tom Aspinall? And if the UFC made Islam Makhachev vacate his title to move up to welterweight, then why is the UFC not doing the exact same thing to Jon Jones if he's not even wanting to fight in general? If he was really this big and bad GOAT in the UFC, then why not prove everyone wrong and just fight Tom, and then maybe you'll beat him? But to be honest, if this fight were to happen, I am 100% picking Tom Aspinall to win the fight. He's a younger and faster fighter than current Jon Jones, and that's the problem right there. By the way, this is just me talking about Jon Jones as a fighter. I haven't even talked about him as a person. There is a whole article of his own criminal history dating back since 2012. There is just so many flaws with this man, and just that reason alone, he is not the GOAT on my list. But anyways, that's all I gotta say about the situation. I know making Jon Jones videos in 2025 is like beating a dead horse at this point, but I think we are close to possibly the end of having Jon Jones not being the champion anymore, and finally have Tom Aspinall as the true heavyweight champion, which by the way, he is the real champion. I'm just gonna leave this video about what Tom Aspinall said about not fighting Jon Jones as my outro, and until then, I'll see y'all later. Goodbye.
Jon Jones, he was praying that I would lose that fight against Curtis Blades, mate. Praying that I would. Because there is nowhere that you can find publicly, nowhere, him saying that he will fight me. It doesn't exist. I challenge anybody watching this interview to go and find a statement, a quote, a video where Jon Jones is saying that he'll fight me after he's fought Stipe. It doesn't exist. The guy's smart. And mate, the guy, we know he's a bit overweight these days. The guy was sat there, mate, with the Cheeto fingers or whatever, the Doritos on his fingers, with his iPhone in hand, waiting for me to get knocked out so he can start tweeting about it. Since I won that fight, he's gone completely quiet, and he'll continue to go completely quiet about me until he retires, because there's no way on earth that he's going to fight me. Not a chance. I will retire Jon Jones without even fighting him.